If you clicked on this video and have made it this far in fantasy football, there are a whole bunch of traps that'll ruin your week, ruin your championship chances on the waiver wire. We need to be avoiding those guys and picking up the true league winners. Lucky for you, in this video, I'll give you guys exactly that. We'll go over all of the league winning guys as well as the league losing guys all in one video. And make sure to stick around to the end because I do have a list of defenses we can pick up and stream off the waiver wire that can put up 20 plus fantasy points. Stick around for that. Hit that like button if you're feeling generous. But KJ Osborn is the #1 guy we need to be adding off the waiver wire this week, and he might not seem very interesting. He hasn't done much more outside of fill in for Justin Jefferson. Give us a couple points here and there, fill in, I guess do decent. But last week he comes out for 95 yards and a touchdown on 7 targets. That's pretty decent, pretty good, and there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is because he saw his snap share jump from 54 to 85 this week because of the injury to Jordan Addison. He left with an ankle injury that was originally deemed to be week to week, and now it's upgraded to day to day, so it's a little bit better, but his status for week 17 is still in question. There's a very real chance he doesn't play. And now we have TJ Hockenson going out for the season with a torn ACL. You hate to see these kinds of injuries, but you have to take advantage of them when they do pop up, or at least play defense so your opponents can't pick up these guys and beat you with them. But all of these injuries make him the wide receiver 2, #2 option in general on this offense behind Justin Jefferson. And this is a really good spot to be in because there really is no 3, 4, 5 after all of these injuries. Nobody has been seeing field time or will earn any kind of receptions this week. And they're coming into this week's matchup against the Packers, who have been somewhat decent throughout the entirety of the season, but as of late, they have been absolutely atrocious on defense. They just let the Panthers drop 30 on them, and they almost let them have a game-winning touchdown drive. The Panthers are one of the worst teams in the NFL. I don't know how that's possible. It speaks volumes to how this defense is playing. But the week before that, they let up 34 points to the Buccaneers, and the week before that, 24 to the Giants. That is pretty impressively bad for a defense. So it's safe to say that this is a positive matchup we want to be targeting, and the Packers allow the 10th most points to opposing wide receivers, even better as of late. Is Nick Mullins an all-pro quarterback? No, but we've seen that he can get it done. It happened last week. He's a perfectly fine option if you do need him. If Hockenson and Addison on top of that do miss, he's going to be a smash play this week and can be started. But a guy that's been getting a lot of hype as of recently is Wandale Robinson, and this is a guy that I do like. He is super talented, but the opportunities just are not there. When it comes to the waiver wire, when it gets down to the end of the seasons and the fantasy championships, or even the end of the fantasy football playoffs, we cannot be getting cute with our rosters. Even our bench spots, they are still valuable. We can pick up good filling guys, so wide receivers or running backs that can actually give us startable value, or even play defense, getting quarterbacks, defenses that stream for ourselves, as well as taking them away from our other opponents so that they can't beat us with those players. There's a whole bunch of uses for your bench, and Wandale Robinson is just one of those guys that's going to clog up the space. He didn't have a great game by any means last week. 3 receptions for 16 yards. He did have 7 targets though, one of the highest on the team. But a lot of this hype is coming from the benching of Tommy DeVito for Tyrod Taylor. And I do agree with that. Tyrod Taylor is a better quarterback in fantasy as well as real football in general, so it is a positive. But how much can he really turn this offense around? It's not been much for the time that he's filled in earlier in the season as well. This offense and team in general is extremely inconsistent, and now they get a matchup against the Rams this week, which are one of the toughest defenses in the NFL as far as the defensive line goes. They're going to put pressure on Tyrod Taylor. They're going to make him get the ball out quick. He's not going to be able to go through his progressions and let all of his routes complete. You could say he's the wide receiver 1 and has some upside that way. That statement doesn't really have validity either, because you could argue that it is Darius Slayton, Daniel Bellinger, or even Darren Waller when they want to use him. Just don't waste your time on him. Don't use a bench spot on him. There's so many better things you could use a bench spot on. Let your league mates pick him up, waste that spot. But another waiver ad I am absolutely loving if all things fall into place, which is a very possible scenario this week, is Romeo Doubs. Yes, he's rostered in 60% of leagues. Go make sure he's not on your waivers, because if he is, he should be your #1 option this week. And he's rostered about the same, maybe even less than some of the other Packers wide receivers, but his situation is extremely great this week because of the health of this team. Jaden Reed popped up on the injury report last week with a toe injury and a chest injury. His status is still in question for this week coming up. I'll keep you guys updated on the injuries in the start sit video coming later this week. I'll go over all the matchups, the players, the ins, the outs, the injuries, all that kind of stuff. So make sure to be subscribed if you're not already and you don't want to miss those videos. But now we have Dontavian Wicks going out last week with a chest injury as well, and his status is in question for week 17. So there's a real chance that we get Romeo Doubs as the only wide receiver active on this roster that has any kind of validity to snaps, targets, any kind of usage in this offense, because Christian Watson's been out for 3 weeks. Is he coming back this week? 50-50 chance. If we get all these wide receivers out, it's going to be Romeo Doubs, and that's pretty much it. I would say it's pretty probable that at least one of these wide receivers does play alongside him this week, but either way, he's a smash play. At least pick him up so your other league mates can't have him, and they get a good matchup this week against the Minnesota Vikings, who will have top 10 points to opposing wide receivers and almost quarterbacks as well. It's a very positive matchup. It's not tough. They don't have an insane pressure rate. Like we talked about earlier, the Packers defense has been really bad, which means their offense is going to have to work twice as hard to make up for that. They're going to have to keep passing, keep the pressure on offense, because their defense can't hold anybody, and that's going to lead to more passing attempts, more fantasy points, more all of that. You guys know the vibes already. But if he's not available, keeping on that same boat, another guy you need to be adding this week, again, if all goes right, is Tucker Kraft. In his 5 full games filling in for Luke Musgrave since he went on IR, he's averaging 10 fantasy points a game. Now, that's not as important. If we look a little bit deeper into the stats, he's averaging 5 targets a game. And if you guys know me, I love volume over fantasy points. Fantasy points can be up and down. They cannot really be predicted sometimes, but volume, usage, snaps, all of that can be, and he sees a great amount of that. Compared to Romeo Doubs, he's only rostered in 26% of leagues, and in his last 3 games, he's averaged 4 receptions for 60 yards. It's a pretty good stat line for tight ends at this point because the tight end pool is extremely low. Again, if we get any or all of these wide receivers to miss this week, he's the number 1 or number 2 option behind Romeo Doubs. And even if we do get Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, and Romeo Doubs as the starting wide receivers this week, a tight end spot is still really valuable for Jordan Love. He's been a guy that he goes to consistently. This does all depend on Musgrave's status, though. He is still on IR. He can come back this week. Do I think it's probable? No. The Packers are playing for a playoff spot, but a tight end isn't really a spot that you really need to rush back, especially when you have a guy like Tucker Kraft really filling in well. But real quick, we do not need to be adding Justice Hill unless you're in really deep RB trouble. This is one of those scenarios where we just really can't use him. Last week, he was a fine add to get us some fantasy points, but if you're in the fantasy football championship, now is not the time you need to be filling in and getting him in your starting lineup for a couple reasons. And the reality of it is he does not get a great matchup. They play the Dolphins this week, who have a top 5 run defense. They allow the 5th least points to opposing running backs this year. Obviously, Keaton Mitchell is out, so Justice Hill is filling in for that spot as the RB2. And we saw a 60-40 split last week. Surprisingly enough, that 60-40 was in favor of Justice Hill, something that we haven't seen too much this year. But this isn't an aha moment. The split in this backfield continues to change week to week. It's not something we really can predict, but something we can predict is the roles in this offense. Maybe Justice Hill saw 60% of the snaps this week. Next week, he'll probably go to 40. It changes every week, but Gus Edwards does own the goal line work, and that is really the most valuable spot in this backfield. The Ravens are a good offense. They do score a lot, and Justice Hill favors in the receiving game. That is valuable, but on a good day, the most targets he's really going to see is 4, and even him averaging 4 receptions, 4 targets a game is not very realistic. There are a whole bunch of better running backs on the waiver wire right now that we can pick up and start if we do need that, and it's not like anybody else is going to pick him up and get good points from him anyways. I have him projected for about 5-6 fantasy points. He's one of those guys that's just going to be a waste on your bench simply because you just can't start him this week unless you're in a 20-30 person league. Speaking of running backs we can pick up that are way more valuable, Clyde Edwards-Helaire needs to be the probably number 1 add of the week if you don't already have him and you see him sitting on the waiver wire. But he'll stay under the radar in a lot of leagues. He's only rostered in 40% of leagues, not too high, not too low, so he should be available. He only saw 4 carries last week, so not a lot of people really going to think twice about it. But the reason he's extremely valuable and should be your number 1 add is because Isaiah Pacheco is dealing with a concussion. There isn't a whole bunch of reports on the status of his concussion and how serious it really is, but it is extremely probable that he does find himself in a situation where he can't play this week, and that makes Clyde Edwards-Helaire the number 1 only workhorse running back because Jerick McKinnon is on IR as well. But on top of that, he's not just any fill-in running back, he's a fill-in running back on the Chiefs, which is one of the most dynamic and good offenses in the NFL. Have they looked like that over the past few games? No, but they still have Patrick Mahomes. You can't overreact. It's still great coaching scheme, great team. They find ways to get their running backs involved. We saw it last week before Pacheco went down. We've seen CEH fill in and be dynamic before and actually be a fantasy playmaker, and now they get a matchup against the Bengals, who are top 10 in points allowed to the running backs. Not a great team, not a great offense. The Chiefs are projected to win this game by a good amount, and if we know anything about team scripts, if they're winning by a lot, it's going to be a more run-heavy game. But let's say you don't need another running back. If you've made it to the fantasy football championship, you probably have some good ones. You can play defense and pick them up so your opponent can't have them. A lot of the times, this is the one trick in fantasy football that they let slip and just don't even realize, and it makes them lose leagues. So go ahead and pick them up, play some defense, but very quickly, sticking on the running backs, do not go out and think Chris Rodriguez is some league-winning unicorn type fantasy football play. The reason people are saying this is because Brian Robinson has been out for a couple weeks now, and it looks like he'll probably miss this week as well. The Commanders aren't really playing for anything. They get a really tough matchup. There's no reason to rush him back, and he's really been playing as the RB1 over Antonio Gibson. So assuming Brian Robinson does miss, people are going to be inclined to pick up this RB1 that does get some kind of value. But again, there are way better running backs to pick up off the waivers. Zamir White, CEH, and Chris Rodriguez is dealing with a little bit of injury himself. It's just not worth it at all. But you guys know I have to give you guys some quarterbacks to stream, all that good stuff, and quarterbacks to not stream as well. Let me go through it super quickly. If you guys do need a quarterback, Derek Carr is going to be the number 1 clear-cut option for this week. There's not a lot of quarterbacks left on the waiver wire that can be viable. He's the only one that's still there. He gets a great matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week, who allow top 2 points to quarterbacks and wide receivers Great all-around matchup. They've got Alvin Kamara, they've got Chris Olave. Their main two guys are still in this offense, so it's not like that's taking away from him. He gets a great matchup, and this team can put together drives. This team is averaging 25 points a game over the last 4 games, and this is pretty good considering they played defenses like the Rams, like the Lions. And Derek Carr does have a higher pass volume than average. He averages the 8th most passing attempts in the entire league. So the opportunities are going to be there to pass and to have fantasy points and fantasy opportunities. And you also have a guy like Alvin Kamara who plays more wide receiver than he does running back. That's going to give him a nice floor to his fantasy points. He's not a great flashy option, but he's about as good as you're going to get on the waiver wire, and he's the number 1 guy you can pick up. Again, if you need to play defense, pick him up so your opponent can't have him. Power moves there. But as for a quarterback we don't need to be adding, I'm sure you're going to see a whole bunch of Sam Howell on the waiver wire this week. He has done a complete 180. His confidence completely down the drain. He's been benched for Jacoby Brissett multiple times, and he has probably the toughest remaining matchups in the NFL. He gets the 49ers this week. Yes, they let the Ravens put up a good amount of points on them last week, and they haven't been insanely good, but against bad offenses and bad teams, they're absolutely killer. You can also assume for a little bit of that superstition that Chase Young is coming for a sack, most guaranteed against Sam Howell, his old team. It's going to be a good full circle moment for him. As a Commanders fan, not too happy about that, but it is what it is. The Commanders' offensive line sucks. There is a very real chance that he does get benched for Jacoby Brissett again, if not the starter. But the best part of this video and my favorite part to make is the defenses. There are some real guys we can stream off the waiver wire. If you do still stream and you made it to the fantasy playoffs, the Bears is one that you can go pick up again. They've been a very solid defense over the past few weeks, averaging 15 points over their last 4. They didn't have a great game. They only had 3 fantasy points against the Cardinals. They still had some sacks. They were decent, but they didn't have a bunch of takeaways. They are leading the NFL in takeaways since week 11. They're a top 5 defense since week 10, and they get a great matchup again against the Atlanta Falcons. They might be a little bit more of a risky defense just because of the validity of this offense, but they're a solid group on their own and one of the best matchups of the week if you guys are still streaming. The Jaguars are another defense we can go ahead and supplement, pick up. They're only rostered in about 30% of leagues, and they get a matchup against the Panthers. I'm sure a lot of people won't go ahead and pick them up because of what happened last week. They put up 30 points, almost beat the Packers. That's not a regular thing. We're going to have volatility in the NFL. Yes, Bryce Young is getting a little better, but this team still projected for one of the lowest points every single week. It's a relatively safe defense. Despite them putting up 30 fantasy points, the Packers still managed to be in the positives for fantasy points. In positive matchups, the Jaguars have been really good as far as fantasy points go. They have been dropping off a little bit from the beginning of the season. Again, the matchups are really what we want to be targeting for these defenses. They have a good defensive line, good pressure rate. It's a place where we can go ahead and start them. The Panthers' offensive line is absolutely atrocious. Again, there's always opportunities for sacks. Pick them up if you do need a defense. The Eagles, Broncos, and Chiefs are also 3 really good defenses that you can get if they are still available. They're rostered in over 60% of leagues though, so it's going to be a lot harder to get them, but I want to make sure you guys are the most informed group of people on YouTube. So these are the best defenses we can go ahead and pick up. If you have any questions about who to start, sit, what defense to pick up, if somebody is available, make sure to drop it in the comments. I will answer 100% of them like I do every week. Seriously appreciate you guys watching these videos every week, and I will see you guys in the next video coming tomorrow.